Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know we have a number of people that haven't actually logged on yet, but we will be making this webinar available to people who were not able to come at a scheduled conflict. So we're excited about this. It's really going to be a great conversation, an engaged conversation, and we want to be sure it's as meaningful as possible for you. And obviously, we're here today to talk about adding value for finance executives, thinking about ways to reduce costs and safeguard profits. And I'm very privileged to be here with Brian Kalish to join us on the presentation. So welcome everyone, and let's just get right into it to stay on schedule, and we'll have others join us as we go. Does that all work for everyone? Perfect. My name is, as Tammy just said, is Richard Sharpe. I am the CEO of Competitive Insights. I've been very privileged and honored to be involved with a number of different companies, all focused on being able to help companies identify ways to reduce costs, gain competitive advantage, and obviously drive additional profits. I've been doing this for quite a long time, but just always love this job because I'm always learning something from the people that we're serving. So we're very pleased to be having this conversation with you today. As a Competitive Insights, as a company, we are focused on being able to help people address these issues that you see on the screen. Obviously, with AI, it's a whole new world. But one thing that we like to emphasize for Competitive Insights is that we are very focused on pragmatic solutions with AI, meaning solutions that can be implemented quickly, that are repeatable, and we'll talk a little more about that in just one moment. But it's very important to us that it's not hype, it's reality with regard to the things that people can do to gain advantage. And that is exactly what this next slide is sharing. We are looking at taking native transactional data. So as you think about your company and where your products are made, sourced, how they move throughout the entire operation, all the costs that accumulate from the very beginning to the very end, delivery to the customer, using all the transactional data associated with that to drive actionable results, and actionable results around where can we reduce costs, how can we actually think about where we have margin erosion. And in order to be actionable, it has to have these attributes. It needs to be trusted, accurate, specific, and sustainable. So we'll spend a little more time on that, but that is our focus as Competitive Insights. And with that, Brian, you would like to do an introduction?
Sure, happy to. Well, again, wonderful to be with everyone. To return the compliment, honor to be with Richard here today. He's a global expert in supply chain, and we've had a very nice collaboration over the years. We have a very strong tie. We're both tied to Georgia Tech, and my background, again, no way going through this, but really my focus is in finance, FP&A. Really taking on the challenges that we see today. And as Richard was saying, AI has really supercharged everything. So for myself, it's a fascinating point in my career where this battle that we've had about actually getting to our data to help us make better, faster, smarter decisions. I think we actually now have the tool, as Richard was saying, this is real. I'm sure there is some hype out there, but what we're talking about is very real and very practical, and a tool to help folks. And for myself, I'm very fortunate that I get to travel the world, and I can tell you the challenges that we're talking about today. Whether when I'm in Washington D.C., Richard's in Atlanta. I know some folks are in Chicago, but same in London or in Dubai. All of these challenges that we're talking about today are truly global challenges that everyone is trying to adapt to, understand what the opportunity, what the art of the possible is. And so hopefully our time together today, we can help kind of enlighten a little bit about what is actually possible.
Excellent. And speaking of challenges, Brian, that's the perfect segue into this discussion. So we thought that we would identify the key takeaways for everyone. You will be getting a copy of this presentation to share with others, but we're not going to go through these in any detail because the content of the presentation is going to address all of these points. But Brian, is there any one or two of these that you'd like to highlight with regard to takeaways from our talk today?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the idea of, if you look at the second one, again, from a finance perspective, it's this focus of getting away from what I affectionately refer to as data wrangling to actually using what humans are good at. And folks may have been hearing this depending on, how much you've been following, is this whole human in the loop concept with AI. And the idea is there are things that adaptive AI can do better than humans, and there are many, many things that humans can do better than AI. So the idea is AI is not going to eliminate you; it's only going to enhance what you do. Um, the other point, and we'll go in a little bit bigger, greater detail. But again, understanding when you go to the fourth point, talking about pinpointing a small percentage of customers that generate the majority of the profits. One of the things that I've seen in my career is understanding, we probably have a pretty good idea about landed revenue, but once we start talking about landed cost and bringing us to what we really care about, which is landed profit, that's always been a challenge at the really detailed level that can help us make an action and come up with a strategy. And again, whether you're talking about, you know, uh, tariffs, for example, kind of on the top of the list of people. But I mean, what's that impact going to be? Well, it's a function of who your customers are and how much value do they provide to you. And then, as Richard was kind of talking about, I'd kind of just the kind of the takeaway at the bottom is customer leading, just kind of the fact that, customer and product profitability, again, is much, you can't really divine that at the GL level. We have to have tools that actually understand it truly, like at the native transactional level, where all the costs are, so that we can actually find out, for those of us in finance, we've spent our entire life allocating costs. And what we're able to do now with adaptive AI is actually assign costs.
Perfect. All right. Well, with that, we're going, as we said, we want this to be really interactive. And so we're going to have a series of polling questions. I know the folks that are actually on are small but mighty. So let's go ahead and move right into the first polling question. So if everyone can just answer what you believe is the best choice for the question of how would you characterize the environment of your AI initiatives, that would be terrific. All right, so the biggest 40% early stage. Okay, that's certainly true for many. Not certain, a very honest answer, and very fragmented. So nobody feels like Brian, as you can see, that they're ready to go, but everyone is still, trying to figure out where it adds the most value. Would be probably a good way to characterize that.
And I would say this is this is what we see across the board. Again, it's people who are very much on the early part of the journey, and part of it's understanding it, and part of what we'd like to do today is kind of enlighten as far as what is real, what can be done.
Absolutely. All right, so let's move on. So let's start with the absolute fundamental foundation for getting value, and that is around data governance and why it's so important for finance and FP&A executives to focus on data governance and get a little bit into that part of this conversation as a foundation to the entire talk. So, Brian, what we have seen, I think, over our collective work over many years, the fact that data is a challenge. It's fragmented very often. It's siloed, as this graphic represents. And in my experience over the many years of helping companies with this, it truly is the Achilles heel for getting effective analytics. What are your thoughts on that, Brian?
So yeah, I mean, basically, kind of what I was thinking is, the way I like writing things down a little bit. So I'll read for just a second and then kind of expand on it. Is finance and FP&A executives must focus on data governance more than ever because financial data fabric is it's just no longer powering human dashboards. It's feeding automated AI models and agentic workflows. I thought what was interesting, kind of doing a little bit of research as we were getting together for this, is so if folks are familiar with, so Deloitte came out with their 2026 Global Human Capital Trend Survey. I want to give proper credit where this is coming from. And it highlights that while 60% of finance executives use AI to support decisions, 61% of them recognize a severe decline in data trustworthiness, right? So here we are, we're using the tools, but I trust it less and less. And the way I kind of think about it is, if the underlying financial and operational data is ungoverned, AI tools will simply accelerate the speed in which an enterprise makes bad decisions, right? So it's just, whether we talk, it can just be Gigo. For myself, the reference I always have is being of a certain age and having lived through the Japanese bank crisis of the early 90s, is when we take one bad bank and another bad bank and put them together, it just creates a bigger bad bank. And that's kind of the challenge that we're seeing. So, those were kind of my thoughts. But again, as we look at the points, the idea is we're all trying to move to this single, source of truth for finance. And the idea being is we just need to move away from the idea of those are Richard's numbers, and these are my numbers, and these are Adrian numbers, and these are Chris's numbers. Is we have to start with agreeing that these are the numbers. Now, what the numbers mean and what the actions that we can take to take advantage of opportunities to mitigate risk, that's where our value is. It's not basically coming up with the numbers. It's understanding what the numbers are and then coming up with action. And that you'll hear that over and over again. It's got to be the action. And again, the idea that, the better you are at data governance, the better you can make decisions. Again, I think it's straightforward. The cost of poor data governance, bad decisions, also freeing us up to do those higher level of analytics, getting away from descriptive and diagnostic to moving to predictive and prescriptive and eventually cognitive. And again, everyone in the room, it would raise their hand to use Excel or Google Sheets. That's still 100%. It's never going to go away. It's a great tool. But again, it's really trying to free up our teams from spending this 70-80% of our time in data acquisition, verification, reconciliation, and freeing us up to really flourish as finance professionals.
And Brian, that is so true. Now, I want to give everyone kind of a pat on the back here. This is really hard. It's this. We're not suggesting that AI is going to just come in and solve this problem for you, overnight. That's not true. But with the right methodology and the right tools, it can give a dramatic impact on reducing that 70% of time to much less time. And one of the things that we can spend more time on, if anyone wants to know, well, what do I do how do I do this, is the fact that it's now very possible to take billions of transactions that are associated with your particular operation and providing it back to the subject matter experts and getting the consensus of the group that the information that's going to be used for the things we're about to talk about is correct and actionable. That can be done in very little time now with the power of AI compared to doing it in some form of manual reconciliation process. So the tools help, but the whole idea is they help in order to get the finance and FP&A executives and the conversations they're having to provide information that nobody takes exception to, that they agree that information is meaningful and actionable. All right, so let's go right now to the next polling question. So if you had specific and trusted cost and profit details by product, by customer, by channel, by region, how would you focus your cross-functional efforts? How would you use that information? And on a repeatable basis, every month you have that, and it didn't take, a Samson type effort to get there. It was, pretty straightforward, but you had it and you trusted it. What would you do with it? Brian, what do you think of this?
So if I look at it, you can answer multiple times.
Yeah, that's right.
So I think it's fantastic that the first thing is no one wouldn't do it. You wouldn't leverage this wonderful, information. Um, but you look at it, that they're all very strong, but the top two, faster identification of margin leakage, again, just so critical in the world that we're operating. Because no, I mean, the world is not ever going to get any slower. It's getting, the velocity of change is increasing, the magnitude of change, and the ability to be able to adjust and take actions to that is only increasing. And then a little closer to my heart is the better forecasting and planning. Right? Is the idea that we can take this to understand more of what if could happen. Right? So again, one of the things that AI is giving us the ability to do is taking all my data, and maybe I could run a scenario a week, but if I leverage AI, maybe I can run 15 a week, right? And so it just gives me a better opportunity, because planning and forecasting is pennies on the dollar. Reacting in a crisis is incredibly expensive. So we can chat about that a little bit offline if folks want to, but it's just this whole idea of how can we forecast better, how can we plan better, by leveraging AI. And again, the whole point being, it's a tool that will permit us to do that. So, there we go.
All right.
Next,
So go ahead, Brian. I'm sorry. I
no,
didn't
no,
mean.
I was handing it to you.
Okay. So I think it's clear that it would be useful in multiple ways. And so now what we want to do is give you some insights from the companies that we help support with this, and talk a little bit about how they're doing this, what they're focused on, what were some of the results. And I'm going to actually bring in a story from an actual customer that was a joint effort between the CFO and the supply chain officer. And I'll give more background on that in just a moment, but dramatic results in very short amount of time. And tariffs, as you said a moment ago, Brian, was one primary driver that was really asking them, how can AI give us relief? But more importantly, how can a process that's sustainable and repeatable be used to help manage the business? So let's move right into that discussion. And so, Brian, you want to start off by just talking through these bullets, and I'll bring in the story that I just mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, kind of the way, I would summarize it, because I don't want to I want to go get to your story, because that's really where the meat is. But kind of the way I was thinking about it, if you take the points, is FP&A executives become trusted advisors by shifting their focus from financial policing, right, being Dr. No, to operational revenue generation. So business leaders don't want to, be told they're over budget. What they want is a strategic partner who helps them achieve their goals. So again, why I kind of thought of that is, again, what do our partners want? Actionable areas that they can reduce their costs and enhance profitability. Again, if I'm a believer, and I reserve the right to be smarter tomorrow than today, so anyone feel free to push back, but we shouldn't be doing any analysis that doesn't lead to an action, right? There's too many things going on. So we have to, and we're limited in time, money, and resources. And so the idea is we have to come up with actionable insight for our business partner. It needs to be reliable and repeatable. It's almost like, and I don't know, Richard, if you would agree with me or not, it's a little bit like the problem with Gen AI, right? Is every time I ask the question, I get a different answer, right? Well, if that happens in business, that doesn't work for me, right? It's got to be reliable and it's got to be repeatable. And as we were saying, from a financial business partner perspective, it really has to have an enterprise-wide perspective on all the opportunities, right? Because if we don't have all the inputs, then the output that we have is going to be limited. So again, as a setup to the story you're going to tell, is the idea of just understanding what really drives your company. And once you can get down to the transactional level, we have seen time and time again, companies are incredibly surprised. Who they thought were profitable customers were actually unprofitable. So with that, Richard, I'll toss it to
Well,
you.
that's absolutely true. And that is exactly right with regard to this story. This was, we're going to talk about products and customers, but specifically the story that I'm going to offer is quickly about products. And as I said, this was sponsored by both the supply chain officer and the CFO, and they knew they needed to get a better handle on specific cost and profit performance by product, by customer, et cetera. This company manufactures products in the Pacific Rim. They are both in manufacturing in home improvement, and they're also distributors. And so the question was, how do we do that? So as we work through giving their organization that information on a repeatable basis, all of a sudden the tariffs changed. And so now they were also using it for something they did not originally think they were going to do. And it gave them immediate opportunities to look at where they should be thinking about tariffs. And one of the big questions they had was, we could look at where we're going to change our product sourcing. That takes years. We could look at rationalizing our product portfolio so that we don't offer the same ones that have really high tariffs. And what's really, really interesting about this is one particular product in that question that they were sure they needed to no longer offer was absolutely one of their best performing products. And they didn't know that because they couldn't get it down from the general ledger to the actual individual product. But that product was contributing, hundreds of percent of margin. The actual number was 600% over their cost, and they had no knowledge of that. So had they taken that off, that would have been a huge issue. Now that they knew that, they could focus not only on, sell more of that, but to be able to identify the other products that were actually draining, eroding profit. So again, being proactive, going into it for better visibility, realizing with that, as Brian said, a disruption they didn't anticipate occurs, and all of a sudden they can make a really smart decision in a matter of weeks, which could have easily not been done at all, and they had made the wrong decision. So quick story on this exact point. So let's keep going. All right. So how do FP&A executives deliver more value? We're moving into that. And so, Brian, we're going to go and talk about now. We're going to look at the actual portfolio analysis that I just mentioned. Thoughts on this, and then I think we're going to tell another story about your favorite color story, Brian.
It's truly a great one, and I do share it around the world, and it gets for the folks that are with us today, hopefully they'll have a similar reaction. Everyone's pretty astounded by it. Again, if we think about just the slide in general and the points we're trying to make, kind of the way that I kind of summed it up is, FP&A and finance executives deliver maximum enterprise value by, again, shifting their resources away from what we've been dealing with, this very low value data wrangling and the idea is we want to redirect that capacity towards achieving strategic goals, right? How do we really move the needle for the organization? So, it's all about value creation, right? And I would argue that true value creation happens when teams use optimization to solve difficult, multi-departmental business problems, right? Things that we haven't been able to deal with before because we don't even understand the problem that we're trying to address. So one of the things that I always talk to with folks that I'm working with are from a data perspective. And so the rhetorical question for our group is, what are the three things that you would, from a data perspective, what are the three things that you would like to know about your company today that you think would truly have an impact on the organization tomorrow? So, data is one component, technology is another component, our people, our talent, the culture that we operate in, and the process. All those frameworks have to come together to move the organization. And so again, the idea, if we look at the data points, right, more time on analysis, less time on the data, the GL, we just live in a world where we've got to be able to dive deeper than at the GL level. And again, it's shifting that focus away from just very broad trends to actually understanding, and Richard's got a fantastic story, but understanding your products, understanding your sourcing, understanding your customers, to again help the organization make those better, faster, smarter decisions.
Absolutely. So here's the story. So this is a different company. It was in apparel. And to Brian's point, they wanted to understand how to reduce complexity. And so in apparel, those of you who know that industry, it's very complex. You source product in different ways. You look at where you're going to source the cloth, you dye the cloth, you cut it in certain ways, you sew it together in another country, you store the inventory close to the market where it's going to be served. So there are a lot of moving parts associated with getting the shirts that we're wearing today, to the stores or e-commerce, however you purchase them. So the sponsors, in this case, it was actually the global officer for operations. What they wanted to understand is everything we're doing, because there's always that question of, should we market this, should we sell this, what if we change the color portfolio to this? And so that's kind of a battle, if you will, is how do you manage the portfolio and the complexity and yet get what the market actually wants? So the question was, can you take the profitability below the SKU itself to the color of the item? And the answer is yes, we can do that, absolutely. And so what they found was that they had never made $1 of profit for the color of fuchsia across their entire product line in the history of the company. And they were about to do a new product launch, and guess what was going to be in the product launch? Fuchsia. So they were able to win that battle because they said it makes no financial sense to continue that when in fact history shows, and we all agree, the data is right, that it makes no sense to continue. And today, obviously, I can't name the company, you will not find a fuchsia product in their portfolio because it just didn't make any money. So we'll move on from there. All right.
Well,
Go
well,
ahead.
I was going to add before. I mean, the other additive, it has, an additive and maybe a multiplicative effect is the fact that those resources that you were utilizing to make a non-profitable product, right now can be redeployed to
Right.
those products that are greater. So it's not just, oh, we've got a cost savings of X. It's additive and probably in certain cases, if not most cases, multiplicable in the sense that now we can actually deploy our resources to those products that actually have, we were saying this is actually makes no money, but is certainly going to be profitable and maybe even to the highest levels of the
Absolutely.
SKUs that are important to us.
Very important, Brian. That's an excellent point. All right. Well, we're pretty much following on track, which is great. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to do the next poll question. All right. What is the single most compelling reason for FP&A executives to integrate into their financial processes? What are your answers for that? Wow,
Well,
a lot of uses, Brian. What do you think?
absolutely. The ability, again, it's all about freeing us up. And, if we take the highest, so that's shifting the finance team's capacity from historic reporting to strategic partnering. That's kind of, I think, a bit of a theme of what we've been talking about today is
Yeah.
the idea of, especially, with the whole concept of human in the loop is the idea that, again, they're just things that humans, AI can do a better job than humans. And again, it's similar to what we were just talking about. When we can get rid of unprofitable SKUs, we can also get rid of unprofitable activities that people are on. And so it frees them up to do higher, greater value. I mean, my whole thing that I kind of talk about is like, what really makes me excited about adaptive AI is the idea of moving low IQ activities off the plates of high IQ people. right, is the fact that, and this is just a progression, not to do a history lesson, but this is just the progression that we've had through humankind. Is that whether it's in the industrial revolution, whether it's the digital revolution. I mean, I'm someone who believes right now that if we call this the AI revolution, it is not just transitional, it is transformational, right? What we'll be able to do going forward is very different from what we could do before. Again, for those of us that have a little mileage, you know, uh, everyone's familiar with Excel. I actually started on Lotus 123. For those that are younger, might want to Google that and understand what that was. But understanding what that impact was, it was huge. All of a sudden, the work that we could do because we were going to a digital spreadsheet from pencil and paper, basically, was transformational. And I think that's really where we are today. So when you look at those poll results, it's again, it's that art of the possible, Richard. It's what can we do if we just leverage this new tool and understand it. So yeah, I'm you can tell I'm way out the curve and I'm very excited about all of this. But I really do think it's going to change, whether I mean business in general, but what we can do in finance, what can happen in supply chain, again, to make those better decisions that truly have a monetary impact on the organization.
And Brian, we had this conversation just recently with a chief operating officer of a $4 billion operation. And again, I don't want to stress companies have to be large to take advantage of this. We're having the same conversations with hundreds of $1 million annual revenues with companies have. But what that COO was saying is very much agreeing with all of the messaging we're saying here, but they were saying that sometimes you have to assemble the right team, to really basically drive the change management that we're talking about. And the dream team, if you will, if I can use that term, having the COO being part of the championing of this effort, having the finance CFO or executive director or FP&A right there with them, having sales right there with them, having operations and supply chain. Now that it's probably unrealistic to get all of those people on the same page, but as many of those as you can, to focus on this with the finance executive leading the conversation around taking native transactional data from Excel spreadsheets, from information that's feeding the general ledgers, from all the transactions of the company, and in a matter of weeks, getting it to where people agree that where you're sourcing that information is the right source, and then without having to pull or put in any new systems. We're talking about the systems that are there today, and then being able to transform that to do the kinds of things we're talking about here, and not only you treat it as a project. We've done it. Here's the answer we were looking for. Hooray! Let's go home and have a beer. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about demonstrating the value of it for an organization, and then enabling the people that are going to use this information to have it every month. So as things change, as new disruptions occur, as people are introducing new products, whatever it is, it's the need to run a business, that this information can be available not only for what you were planning to use it for, but for the things you didn't even anticipate using it for. So I'll stop, but like Brian, I'm equally passionate and excited about this. So I think hopefully this is making sense, and so we're going to focus now directly on FP&A questions and embracing AI to be able to make your life easier, basically. So Brian, let's go right to this point.
Absolutely. And so, again, you'll see the word key is it's actionable. I mean, again, think about, how much of the work that we do, how much of the analysis that we're required to produce. If we ask the question, but what action came from that, right? That we really want to free people up to provide those kinds of insights. So the quick little thought I had was, FP&A and finance executives must embrace AI to elevate their teams from being historical operational scorekeepers to into predictive, high value strategic business partners, right? And so it's really understanding and this is really where I think finance and FP&A can really, really enhance their value is on that strategic financial business partner role, right? Is being able to leverage the data the organization already has. And I think the number, Richard, you may have a better number than I, is that 90% of the data that organizations have is what's referred to as dark data. Either they don't know they have it or they're not using what they actually do have. And so the idea is taking that dark data and bringing the light to it. So again, all this, if you look at that first point, right, we have all this data and it's in these different silos. How can we take that, right, and make a better, faster decision based on it? We've touched a bit on, what are the real root causes? I mean, in my career, what I've seen, Richard, sometimes is, if we miss our numbers, it was because of our national accounts, right? It's always the big guys, the big gals. That's what happened. We missed on them. And once you even start digging into it and going, no, it was because we were giving discounts to people that shouldn't be getting discounts. And you can dive in a little bit deeper. I don't know if we have a slide or not, but certainly we can talk about that. Is the great question that you shared, and is how many of your customers are actually profitable? How many of your customers are actually generating the true value for the organization? And revenue is relatively easy to get to, but what we really care about is cost and understanding then what that net profit is for the organization. And so the idea that what's been holding us back is the fact we can't get access to our data. And even if we can get access to our data, and assuming again the data is good, is converting the data. Data in and of itself has no value, right? It's converting data into information that creates insights, that creates knowledge, that then generates a decision, right? And so from a business perspective, walking in, whether it's from an outside person, but just someone internally saying, which of our customers generate revenue but actually destroy margin?
Yeah.
That is an incredibly valuable piece of information and insight because it will drive what the organization does. And I believe, finance is probably best positioned to provide those insights to the business. Because we've just been doing, we've had access to all the financial data for so long. We're pretty good at analytics. And again, our role as support is coming, we're not in the business of trying to explain to the business how to run their business. We're here to provide insights so they can make better business decisions and really help them thrive.
Absolutely. And finance is the perfect organization to facilitate that because you're looking at the entire enterprise. You're looking at the sales, you're looking at the sourcing, you're looking at the operational costs. And let's be really real here. Why a customer is unprofitable in one situation could be completely different than an unprofitable customer in for another driver of that. So one may be discounts, one may be too specific on service. They're getting 2-hour service when they should get once a week service, and that cost is driving that. So finance is in a perfect position because the root cause for great margins and margins that are destroying the profitability of the company are going to come from both the revenue and the cost side. And it's not just one answer, it's going to be specific to that product and customer. So let me talk a little bit about this map because I think it's interesting. So what we're showing here is one of our most popular analytical reports. And what you see is the size of the dots represent how much revenue is coming from a particular customer location. So the bigger the dot, the more revenue that's being generated. Now, the color of the dot is representing how much profit, to Brian's point, is coming from the revenue that's being generated there. So you can see we've got some really large green dots, and that's great. Customers are buying a lot, and we're making a lot of money. But, as Brian said, I'm in Atlanta. Look at the area of those two big red dots in the Atlanta, middle north Georgia. You know, they're selling a lot of product to those customers and they're losing their shirt on it. Now remember, this is information that has been validated and verified and is being repeated every month. So if I know that, it's not necessarily that I want to fire the customer. It's what is causing that behavior. And can I do things to at least get them to be more marginal? Not drain the profit, but at least contribute something to the profit because I may need that volume, right, for other reasons. So it's just having informed information to be able to say, why is that? Let's get to the root cause. Let's be sure that we can focus on the things we can do about it and move on. So let me tell you one more story. Sorry, but I love stories. And so this is a pharmaceutical company, and they absolutely wanted to be able to ask that question, and they had 150. Now this is a large company, of course. They had 150,000 locations in the U.S. alone. They were a global company, but the focus was to start on the U.S. So, they did exactly the things we're talking about, what Brian just offered and the background information we're offering in this talk. And so when they got to the point where they saw a map like this, where they knew exactly where they were losing money by each customer location, a couple of things. The first one is their 11th best customer based on revenue contribution was totally unprofitable. That's a significant finding.
Very powerful.
Yeah. What they also found is for drivers that can affect it, whether it's discounts or pricing or service levels or air shipments, or chargebacks, whatever it is. They also found that by having that information, as Brian was saying, with finance, driving this, they found 24. This is just at their beginning start of this. They found 24 different drivers, initiatives that could be managed to drive down costs and increase margins. Now, we're not suggesting, and I want to make this very clear, that you just go off and do all 24. That's not possible, right? But you can prioritize, what's the first thing we can do so that people in the organization are excited about it. They want to get on the bandwagon because they see you're directly impacting, the bottom line, right? Which for-profit companies should be focused on. So what's the very first thing we can do? And you know what they did? What they said is, we're going to just focus on customer service. And we're going to focus on customer service where we can make a difference. And for those customers that are totally unprofitable, we're going to work with our sales team and we're going to migrate them from getting, within hours of delivery and the next day deliveries to deliveries that make more sense maybe in 3 days or 5 days, and cut our outbound delivery costs down to help move those margins from red into yellow. And that can make a significant impact because if you look around, this map, you see a lot of yellow, but you see a lot of red, and you want to turn those more to green, right? So that's just another story that focuses on having that kind of visualization to be able to make better decisions that you work on over time, cross functionally for the betterment of the organization and your shareholders and your stakeholders. All right. So we're on schedule, which is great. So Brian, I think we're going to start a wrap up so we can start seeing for questions. Let's move right along to key takeaways. So we showed you this before, but we want to go back now that we've talked through these points. And Brian's probably smart for you to kind of walk through each one, and because we have talked about these, and just let's just do a recap, and then we can actually see the questions that we have from Tammy.
Right. So again, if we start at issue one, again, the idea that we can identify, again, 20, 35% of operating costs. What are those costs that are causing particular SKUs, be it products, be it customers, be it locations, that we can try to mitigate that? And again, the idea being really just back to that last slide of the map is, it's not all about like, how do I take my worst customer and make him my best customer? Well, that's not very likely, right? But the idea of how can I migrate, make decisions that move it in the right direction, right? Because every dollar I don't lose is a gain, right? So the idea being, if I only look at my good, let's say all my profitable customers generate 100 million in profit, but my poor performing customers actually consume $20 million. So I go out and I was like, okay, well, I'm an $80 million, margin, right? The idea that, yeah, growing is great, right? Growing, but I also, if I can mitigate the negative, so much the better. So if I could take that 20%, that $20 million loss and just get it to zero, right? Well, I now become $100 million company, right? And so that's how we have to think. But if we don't have the data, we can't take the actions. I think, we're seeing this across the board. The second point, again, it's just freeing our people up to answer those great questions, right? Is getting out of, what I affectionately refer to as Excel hell. I'm sure everyone in the room has their version of it. I joke in the sense that, or attempt to joke, is, if you think for a moment, so a slight tangent, if you think for a moment, think about all that technology that we had in 1985. How much of it do we use today? Probably very little, except for Excel, right? Excel's like 41 years old now, right? And again, it's not a tool that's going to go away. I love it. It's great. Finance people, of a certain vintage, we grew up on it, and, we want to be Jedi Knights as far as, making our models. But there's better ways to do it now, right? And so the idea of freeing up our folks again to get out of the, diagnostic and descriptive and getting into predictive and prescriptive and eventually cognitive AI. Analytics. Yep. The idea that by diving deeper, one of the things that we've never been able to answer before is why, right? And that's what finance is all about, is answering the question why. It's because we can only get to that last level of aggregation of information, right? So if I'm just looking at what's on the GL, it's really hard to really understand what's driving that. We touched on the idea that there's probably, and I've seen this across the board, and Richard, you've seen it many times too, is, once we start understanding who our customers are and what value they bring to the organization, it's not a Pareto rule situation where 20% of our customers are or 20% of our products, or whatever metric you want to use, is generating 80% of my profit. I've actually found, and Richard, please feel free to opine, the number is typically less than 20% is generating more than 80%. So it's more 10%, 90%. And so understanding that even more is so incredibly important. Again, just AI is just going to let us act faster, right? Is just the idea that, if we move to a world that we can just take all our data, update it on a monthly basis, and basically understand what's going on in the organization, the way I kind of look at it is, if it takes me 3 months to do a 1 month forecast, it's not a very effective tool. And I'm sure some people in the room do analysis like that, where it's required to do, but it's not actually driving the business. the faster that we can understand what's going on, the faster we can take those decisions. And then I can't drive the 6 point great enough, which is the fact that to be able to really have the impact that we want to have, right, is the insights, they're going to be powerful, they're going to be trusted, repeatable, and scalable across the entire organization. And I'll pause at that point, Richard.
So thank you, Brian. That was a great recap. So I just wanted to, for some, you may be thinking it all sounds great, but is this another ERP implementation? Or, what are we talking about? What is the scale of the effort here? So we put this one bullet on the bottom, but I just want to elaborate that quickly, and then I don't know if we have questions at the end that you have already asked, but let's just go there really quickly. So the process is to have two discovery meetings with a company, and that's only 90 minutes each. And from that, we can create basically a plan that says this is how it would work for you. Now, so that sounds great. I mean, 90 minutes twice, we can do that. But what about your time? And how long does it take? So the time required from people on your team, we like cross-functional participation, but all the folks that are involved, we only need an hour and a half a week of their time to do this, of the team members, right? Because remember, we're taking the native data, we're doing all the work on our side. So we're doing the heavy lifting. So an hour and a half per person, and the timeline's about 10 weeks. Now that's, depending on complexity, but if you can spare, an hour and a half over a 10-week period, now there's some of that is a little front loaded, right? Because we have to learn the business a little, to do this. But if that sounds reasonable in a 10-week period, we can show you what products are making money and which products are losing money, what customers are making money and which customers are losing money, and the drivers for those. Why is that happening? And then from there, you can build on a lot of other things that we haven't talked about today that should enable the organization and prepare the organization to answer questions you don't even have today.
The quick summary that I just put together was, point one, effective data governance enables trusted, scalable insights, reducing costs, supporting AI-driven analysis. My second point would be finance and FP&A leaders should focus on high-value analysis, pinpoint those profitable customers, and address margin erosion quickly. And the third kind of takeaway for myself is embracing AI enhances root cause analysis and disruption mitigation, transforming finance from, again, data gathering to strategic advising, safeguarding profitability across the enterprise. So for myself, again, feel free, folks can reach out to, I think it's safe to say, Richard or myself, if there's anything that you might want to discuss offline. But again, thank you so much for your time today. Again, hopefully we addressed the questions that people were asking throughout the conversation. So with that, I will stop talking, which is a hard thing to do oftentimes, Richard, and toss it to you.
We are available to address your questions, and just, the goal is to help your organization embrace AI, reduce costs, be able to reduce complexity, as one of our stories said, to be able to gain competitive advantage through profit growth and performance. Thank you for your time. We very much appreciate it, and we will be doing more of these. We're very, as I said, very privileged to have Brian be part of our team, and we look forward to a future discussion with you. Thank you very much.
Good day.